Hello there, I'm the Biblical Translator, and today's scripture is taken from Luke 41. And it's where Jesus' parents took him to Jerusalem for the Passover. Jesus, by this time, was 12 years old, and they did all the festivities, and then they came home. And when they came home, they assumed he was among all the people that were there, only to find he didn't come home. And it reminded me of Home Alone. It reminded me of where the parents, in their hustle and bustle, left Kevin behind. And why did I make that analogy? Because Kevin, he was battling against burglars, he was battling against evil, his life was in potential jeopardy, he was being targeted, he was being abused, and he was literally fighting the forces every which way. And I thought, when Jesus is in the temple and he was listening to the religious teachers and asking questions, it was his way of preparing for the evil he was due to face. It was his way of protecting himself from sin. And all of those, all the opposition and the negative situations he would find himself in as he grew older. So I drew that parallel because when we watch Home Alone, it reminds us of the possibility how we take things for granted, how we don't safeguard those who are dear to us, who are close to us, how we're so absorbed in what is going on in the moment, we're not doing our checks, we're not double checking, we're not triple checking, we're just going with the flow and taking things for granted. And as parents, we have a responsibility to look after our children, to safeguard our children from harm. And yes, Jesus' parents were frantic. They start when they realised he wasn't with the people, the crowds that were there. They started going to all neighbours' houses and their relatives and their friends to see if he was there. And that's something that we would probably do as conscious and caring parents. We would try to look for the child and search everywhere for him or her to see where they are, and then we'd start envisaging all the bad things that might have happened. Has somebody kidnapped him? Is he being harmed? Is he being tortured? Is he being molested? Will he come home safe? All of those thoughts come through, and then you start feeling guilty. Oh, I was so neglectful. You start blaming yourself. I should have paid more attention. And the blame moves from the child, and then we start blaming the child and accusing the child because we don't want the responsibility of such a big loss. So we start saying, oh, the child was wrong. The child should have stuck by the parents. The child should have been holding on. The child should have called out. But interestingly, when they went back to Jerusalem 3 days later, and they were saying to Jesus, look, we were frantic, we were so worried about you. He says, what are you worrying about? Didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? In other words, didn't you know I'd be safe? Didn't you know I'd be learning? Didn't you know that wherever I am, I will be doing God's will? But parents don't think like that. Parents don't give children enough kudos. Children are so much more intelligent than we give them credit for. Young people, they are so much more knowledgeable. They take so much more in. They retain so much more. And yet we still sometimes treat them as though they're stupid and they're silly, and we put them down. And we make them feel as though they're irresponsible and unreliable. When really, some of them are just going about God's business. And what I mean by that, some of them are just trying to learn about how to protect themselves as adults. What can they learn? What can they do to show other people? How can they benefit other people by learning what they know? And so when somebody asks them a question, they'll be able to answer because they've taken the extra time to learn. And when Kevin's parents left him in New York when they went on a flight, and that's what he was doing. He was investigating, he was researching, he was planning. He was planning how to keep his parents' home safe. He was planning how to protect a neighbour who was living alone. He was being responsible, even as a child. So what does this tell us? It tells us, number one, when we have our children, sometimes we just have to leave it to God to bring them home. Sometimes it's about being responsible. Now, if they were responsible and they had Jesus with them, and he wouldn't be holding their hands at 12, but at least before they left the area, at least check where he is. And if he said, oh, I want to stay behind in the temple, you could say, okay, we'll come back for you in 3 days, or how long do you need? Or there would have been some conversation going on. But I don't see how you can leave an area and not check to see where your child is, and just assume he's among all the crowds that came there for Passover. I don't see how you can assume that. But it's prophecy, isn't it? It had to happen. Jesus had to be left behind. He had to have that experience. He had to show his parents, don't worry about me. I'm a child of God. I'm learning to do God's will. I'm learning the will of my Father. And even though he wasn't a ritualistic person, he still wanted to know the principles of the teaching, so he would know how to exercise it in his own way, and he would choose how he was going to interpret what those religious leaders said, because he didn't operate on rote. He didn't do things automatically. And he had his own interpretation, like when they was talking about the Sabbath, he shouldn't heal on the Sabbath. He had his own way of interpreting it. And the same way when we read the Bible, we don't have to take it literally scripture for scripture. What does the Bible mean to you? What can you learn from it? What is it telling you? Don't alienate yourself from the scriptures just because they're written in a different language. Sometimes different languages teach us something. I'm always watching these languages. I'm always watching Korean movies. I don't understand a word they're saying. They've got subtitles that go very quickly. But I'm learning the innuendos. I'm learning the tones, and when they make a mistake or when they want to emphasize something. And it's making me smile. And even though they have the subtitles there, sometimes I don't read the subtitles. But I can't speak Korean, but I get a feeling that I can interpret what's happening in my own way, through glancing at the expressions, to listening to the intonations, to reading the words or the interpretations. So all I'm saying is that, it's like me translating the Bible in my own way, getting from it what I feel it's saying to me, and sharing it with you. You'd probably have a totally different idea. Traditional Christians will probably think I'm loopy, but it doesn't matter. We're all here to share our knowledge, what we find, and share it with others. And I think that is our experience today. I think what we have to learn is not to be afraid to look at things differently, not to just follow the leader. We can be trendsetters. And so I'd like to think I'm a trendsetter. I'd like to think that I do things differently. And I think I'm going to stop it there. I'm the Biblical Translator, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.